In the quiet suburbs of California, a shadow lurked in the night, a predator who struck with precision, leaving behind a trail of fear and devastation. For over a decade, he terrorized communities, evading capture and earning the name the Golden State Killer. This is the story of one of the most elusive and terrifying serial criminals in American history, a tale of obsession, survival, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Joseph James DeAngelo was born on November 8, 1945, in Bath, New York. His early life was marked by instability. His father, a sergeant in the U.S. Army, was often absent, and the family moved frequently. When DeAngelo was just 9 years old, his younger sister was sexually assaulted and murdered. The case was never solved, and the trauma of this event would haunt the family for years to come. While we can't definitively say how this early trauma shaped DeAngelo, it's possible that it planted the seeds of his later behavior. Many serial killers have a history of childhood trauma, and DeAngelo's case is no exception. After serving in the Navy during the Vietnam War, DeAngelo returned to California and pursued a degree in criminal justice. He joined the Exeter Police Department in 1973, where he worked as a patrol officer. It was during this time that his double life began to take shape. By day, he was a law enforcement officer. By night, he was the Visalia ransacker. His knowledge of police tactics allowed him to evade capture, while his job as an officer gave him an ideal cover. He was often seen as a disciplined, authoritative figure, but behind closed doors, his mind was consumed with sinister fantasies. Between 1974 and 1975, the quiet town of Visalia was plagued by a series of burglaries. The intruder, later identified as DeAngelo, broke into over 100 homes, often stealing personal items like jewelry, photographs, and underwear. He would rearrange furniture, leave bizarre items behind, and sometimes linger in the homes for hours. His behavior was erratic, but it was clear he was studying his victims. Many reported hearing faint noises in the night, only to wake up and find their homes ransacked. Others discovered footprints outside their windows, evidence that someone had been watching them long before the break-ins. As the ransacker grew bolder, his actions escalated. He began attempting abductions, and when thwarted, he turned violent. In September 1975, he broke into the home of Claude Snelling, a local journalism professor, attempting to kidnap his teenage daughter. But her father intervened. During the struggle, DeAngelo shot and killed the father, Claude Snelling. This was the first known murder attributed to the Golden State Killer. After leaving Visalia, DeAngelo moved to Sacramento and began a new chapter of terror. From 1976 to 1979, he committed at least 50 sexual assaults, earning the name East Area Rapist.
In 1976, he moves up to Sacramento, and over the course of the next 3 years is moving all across Northern California, committing numerous sexual assaults, over 50 sexual assaults.
Here, he was called the East Area Rapist.
His victims were primarily women, but he often targeted couples, tying up the man and assaulting the woman while the husband was forced to listen. DeAngelo's methods were chillingly consistent. He would stalk his victims for days, sometimes even weeks, learning their routines and habits. He often called them beforehand, whispering threats or breathing heavily on the other end of the line, instilling fear before he even struck. He would disable porch lights, cut phone lines, and enter homes through unlocked windows or doors. His attacks were methodical. He would wake victims at gunpoint, force them onto their stomachs, and bind them with shoelaces or cords. If a couple was present, he would tie up the man and stack dishes on his back, warning that if he heard them fall, he would kill them both.
51 women were raped in their own beds, sometimes while their husbands and children watched. He murdered 12 people that we know of, but the kill count may be higher.
The psychological torture was just as horrifying as the physical assault. After the assaults, he would often steal personal items, rings, watches, photographs, lingerie, small trophies to relive his crimes. Some victims reported hearing him sob after the attacks, whispering about his mother, hinting at deep-seated rage and trauma. By the late 1970s, DeAngelo's crimes had taken a darker, deadlier turn. What began as a series of break-ins and assaults had now escalated to murder. His transformation from the East Area Rapist to the Golden State Killer was marked by an increasing appetite for violence, one that would leave entire communities paralyzed with fear. In February 1978, Brian and Katie Maggiore, a young couple from Rancho Cordova, were out for an evening walk with their dog when they noticed something unusual, a suspicious figure lurking near a house. That man was Joseph James DeAngelo. Realizing he had been seen, he made a chilling decision. He could not let them leave alive. The quiet suburban night was shattered by the sound of gunshots. Witnesses later recalled seeing the couple running for their lives, only to be gunned down in cold blood. Their bodies were found just a few blocks from their home, a stark warning to anyone who might cross paths with the unseen predator. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few years, DeAngelo committed at least 13 murders, often targeting couples in their own homes, places that should have been safe. His signature was as cruel as it was calculated. After breaking in under the cover of darkness, he would bind the victims, placing dishes or glasses on the man's back. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, he would whisper his deadly warning, "Don't move, don't make a sound. If I hear those dishes fall, I'll kill her. Then I'll kill you." Terrified and helpless, his victims had no choice but to comply as he carried out his gruesome acts. His precision was unnerving. He seemed to know their routines, their vulnerabilities, even small details about their personal lives. Investigators later discovered that he had spent days, sometimes weeks, stalking his targets, mapping out escape routes, cutting phone lines, and even breaking into their homes beforehand to leave hidden markers or unlock windows. One of his most infamous crimes was the 1980 murder of Lyman and Charlene Smith in Ventura County. The successful attorney and his wife were found brutally slain in their bedroom. DeAngelo had bound them with intricate knots, sexually assaulted Charlene, and then used a log from their own fireplace to bludgeon them to death. The crime scene was horrifying. Blood-stained walls, shattered lives. The sheer brutality of the attack stunned even the most seasoned detectives, leaving no doubt that they were dealing with a sadistic killer who seemed to relish inflicting pain. As the years passed, his attacks grew even more savage. The horror spread from Sacramento to Contra Costa, Stockton to Goleta. With each new crime, the fear escalated. People double-locked their doors, kept weapons by their beds, and installed floodlights. Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight, yet DeAngelo always seemed to be one step ahead, slipping through the cracks like a ghost in the darkness. Then, in the mid-1980s, something strange happened. The killings stopped. Just as suddenly as he had appeared, the Golden State Killer seemed to vanish without a trace. Had he died? Moved away? Or had he simply chosen to stop? For decades, these unanswered questions tormented investigators and the families of his victims. The case grew cold, but the fear he instilled never faded. Even in his absence, his shadow loomed over California, a grim reminder that a monster had once walked among them, unseen, unstoppable, and still out there. For decades, the Golden State Killer remained a ghost, his name whispered in fear but never attached to a real face. Despite extensive investigations, thousands of tips, and a mountain of evidence, he was an enigma. DNA technology had linked his crimes, proving that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man. Yet without a name to match the DNA, justice remained out of reach. Time passed, and the terror he left behind became history, an unsolved mystery that haunted detectives and the families of his victims. Some believed he was dead, others feared he was still out there, an old man living a quiet life, blending in, perhaps even watching the world forget his crimes. But science had a different plan. In 2018, a breakthrough shattered the decades-long silence. Investigators turned to an unconventional method: genetic genealogy. Using public DNA databases, they traced the killer's genetic footprint, narrowing it down to a family line. It was a long shot, but the results were chilling. The evidence pointed to an unassuming man, a retired police officer named Joseph James DeAngelo. Surveillance teams collected a discarded DNA sample, a tissue from his garbage, a door handle he touched. When the test came back, the truth was undeniable. The Golden State Killer had a name, a face, and he had been hiding in plain sight all along. On April 24, 2018, authorities moved in. The man who had once been a phantom, slipping through the night like a shadow, was now an aging, gray-haired figure living a quiet suburban life. He didn't resist. He barely spoke. The hunt was over. In court, DeAngelo remained eerily silent as his victims' families confronted him. Some demanded answers. Others simply wanted him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. But the man who had once wielded absolute control now sat powerless, shackled, his reign of terror reduced to a courtroom spectacle. In August 2020, after admitting to 13 murders and nearly 50 rapes, DeAngelo was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. For the victims and their families, it was a long overdue reckoning. The fear he had instilled for decades was finally met with justice. Yet as the courtroom emptied, one chilling question remained. Why? What drove a man with a stable career, a family, and a respected position in society to become one of the most sadistic serial killers in history? Was it the thrill of power, the rush of control, or was he simply evil? DeAngelo never answered. And maybe that silence was the most terrifying truth of all.
I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry to everyone I've heard. Thank you, Your Honor.